Here I want to welcome you and let you look at a $1 million view that the smokers afford you as you have arrived in the parking lot at the Pittman Center Elementary School. And we were fortunate to be here to the point today you can see it. Some days you cannot. The 6,595 feet peak is like I call a sentinel overlooking us, giving us inspiration, guidance, and maybe encouragement, telling you've done a good job. And like my friend Hannibal Smith, I like it when a good plan has come together.
Absolutely.
And
Glenn, tell me, how did Pittman Center School, and this is just an absolutely gorgeous school, how did it end up in this location?
in this location, well, let me first say that our blessings in delay, we were first given 13 acres down at the mouth of Copeland Creek and Little Pigeon River. In 1997, with the promise of the school board to build there. Mm-hmm. And in 2001, we went to them and said, listen, the flooded waters that get in and around into the school and around the Pittman School is enough. We want to be moved.
Right.
If we raised $1 million to give you, would the school board start a new building? At that time, on the 13 acres, Dr. Jack Barton said if they didn't, they should be ashamed of themselves. So they accepted our pledge. We developed a 10-minute video to tell them what we were doing. Mm-hmm. And the plan for that was down at the Copeland Creek site. And meanwhile, this 38 acres became available for sale. And around 2003, Dr. Barton called us back and said, would you men be amiable for us to buy the 30 acres and move the school up there on 321 with a loud-sounding amen, yes, go for it. So they bought it at the hillside and hollow, so they leveled it off, worked in, and it's so that's why I say it was a blessing.
Oh, it is. Delay. And the view is absolutely incredible. I was standing when I got out of my car looking down 321, and it was just absolutely just breathtaking. And just the beautiful school, plus more land to expand and grow if ever need to. Mm-hmm. Well, the inspiration of the mountains is enjoyed by all, and I think someday when the children are graduated and moved on in their channel of living, they'll think back to this. I asked Miss Carr not too long ago, because down at the other place, the thing that attracted them most was the sound of the water. Oh, they said they formulating new members here because we have turkey every day, we've had bears, and we've had deer coming up the windows looking inside. So those are new members that the children today are going to see and remember long after we're gone. Well, Glenn, let's go inside, and if you would please give us some history of Pittman Center itself. Okay. One of the most wonderful places in the absolute wonderful places in the world. Glad. Let's go. Thank you. I'd like to tell you first about the man that was really the first man on the scene. He was a traveling Methodist evangelist as far back as 1913. And in 1919, he brought his friend, Dr. Eli Pittman, who was the district superintendent of the Elmira district in New York. And he said to him, this is what I would like for the Methodist Church to do. I would like to start a community center, because these people here are intelligent, but they're locked in. Mm-hmm. They need health and they need education. Dr. Pittman says, why do you not bring the vision and share it at the annual conference in July? Which he did. They voted unanimously to begin an outpost mission here in the Southern Appalachians. And they also asked, we want Dr. Burnett, since he's familiar with the people, to be the constructor, the superintendent. So he came on scene, and he bought the land, he and assistants, and started the building in 1919, worked on it through 1920, and because his friend was so influential in getting money to buy the 1,500 acres, as well as construction, he named the center in honor of his friend Eli Pittman, who still resided in New York, mm-hmm. but was very instrumental in other channels of financial help as the needs came about. And one of those was a young man by the name of Dr. Thomas, who had just returned from a missionary appointment in Malaysia. He had gone there as a minister, but he found out that they needed physical help as well as spiritual. So he felt by God to come back and get a medical degree and at Syracuse. And when that was finished, his wife had become ill to the point they would not reappoint him to go overseas, but they found out Pittman Community Center needed a physician. So the meeting was set, and Dr. Burnett met with him and appointed him, and he came in 1926. And Dr. Flynn came just 2 or 3 months earlier, and he was kind of hand-selected. He was also a minister. Both of these were ministers, but he was an educator. He had a PhD in education, so that the assurance could be given to anyone that might graduate from Pittman Center High School could be assured to go into any college in the United States.
That's
so
amazing.
He worked with the Tennessee State Department of Education to make sure we were on solid ground.
Well, that's great. Glenn, what a bunch of history here.
When the $1 million was given to the school board, we asked, now, can we have a request fulfilled? Can we have, there's no free lunch. We want some amenities to put in here that maybe the other schools don't have. And one was, we would like a museum that would reflect our cultural heritage, not only of Pittman Center, but the Southern Appalachian. And I won't get into the long story, but the museum foundation came into being, and their mission statement is that we will collect the artifacts, items of interest reflecting culture, history, and archival material, collect, develop, preserve, maintain, and display our cultural history. And that was what we will see when we go through these doors.
Let's go. Sounds great. Glenn, this is so important to keep the history here for the pride of ownership for the kids, plus just that they know about their past.
Well, one of the themes for the foundation that is in charge of this is that heritage is important, and we feel it's important enough to pass on to the future generation. Heritage is that which we have received in the past, and we feel obligated to pass on to those who follow. And the displays here, as you see, is representative of certain styles of life. We wanted to do it in this small stuff in exhibits. We've got the big photos, as you see.
Oh, those are great. Where did you get the photos?
Well, those were some of my collection. I just laid them out.
Oh, gosh.
Jim Corkendall and G. Webb just picked them out and said we want to put these
Let's
up.
talk about a few of the photos,
okay.
and then we'll get back to the display cases.
Well,
okay, now which is this one here, up here?
That's possibly the first photo of Pittman Elementary School. And I don't need to know the date, but it's probably 1921, 22. But to answer your question, there were a lot of feeder schools. That's the campus as it looked in 1934. But we had a lot of feeder schools, Copeland, Black Gum Gap. I'll show you these more on the raised relief map.
Okay,
But
okay.
they came in and it became a boarding school. There were girls' dorm, boy dorms, as well as the clinic and the parsonage and the old gymnasium you see there in the middle.
And that was in the floodplain, correct?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, that was one of the problems.
The big flood in 1938 really did a lot of damage to the campus in that year. But this was the first so-called campus where the disciplines were separated. The manual training building, the home economic building, and so forth. And that, one reason why it kind of gave some good publicity to Pittman Center in its beginning, because other schools always housed in one building.
Right.
And Dr. Thomas's clinic is just off, as well as his house. He lived on up the hill.
Show us some of these display cases.
Okay. Well, corn is king. And as my friend Herb said, you could have 100 acres, but you'd still be poor if you didn't have something to eat. So corn was king. It was the king crop. You could be used for many different household uses, as well as feed for your livestock. And
People, they survived off it.
yes, it was. That's why you could survive if you had corn as a staple. And
And then you see the artifacts, the wreaths and the doll. That got it later on. The corn entered into the craft world. The two wreaths that you see and the dolls, but moonshine was part of our heritage.
Right.
And it was many times people could not have bought shoes. There are certain items that you have to sell in order to get to certain things, and moonshine was one of the items. That's water, though.
Right.
And
that'd be for medicinal purposes only.
yes,
Definitely.
my mother, most of them, a lot of women were the medicinal people, but you made liniments out of mints, and you had to put some alcohol in it or moonshine to keep it from becoming moldy and spoiling. So it was needful on the home as for medicinal purposes. These other items are just representative of the use of corn.
Show us another one. You talk about corn was king. People around here were real survivors. I mean, they were tough people. Tell us about some of the ways they made it through tough times.
Well, they learned to do or do without.
Right.
They were the market to go to. And this illustrates basically how people turn nothing into something. We were living in those days, we were living in the green age and didn't know it. I mentioned the fact eggshells were dried and crushed to get back to the chickens. All kind of plants on the farm could be used for various dyes. There's just an example here of onion skins that if you boil them, drop your Easter eggs in them, depending how long that's true with any dyes, how long you let the cloth or the egg stay in the dye, depending on how yellow it gets or how dark it gets. But metal and glass was hard to come by, so neither glass nor metal was thrown away. They were recycled to store tools, nails, or medicinal seed or leaves. In that instance, it's the Jerusalem oak, which is a good item for liniment for sprains. If you've ever used, and I'll mention this, Rex Sorbine Jr., that's what it's made from.
Okay.
But orange peels, you didn't get oranges except basically during the Depression except for Christmas. And you dried the peels and you had an orange drink as a result from the oranges that you and your brother and sister had collectively, and it lasted, so you could make several jars of that. And sweetened with honey, because nobody had sugar in those days, or molasses. But anyway, it was a lot of times it was a patch upon a patch.
Right.
But the scraps were not thrown away, as you can see. That's part of a quilt. And here are just homemade tools and cracked dishes. Because it was cracked, didn't mean it was useless. It was maybe a dish that you could store eggs in, if you'll use them, or the dried food.
I think people relied on a lot of natural remedies, and it seemed that the people were basically pretty healthy because they were living on good natural food. They weren't getting in a lot of chemicals, pesticides, blah, 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 all that.
They learned what plants was valuable for dyes or medicine or food, and they applied it to their living. And it was a great life for those, if you knew how to apply those things. Technology has improved the quality of life, but the quality of living is dependent upon that technology.
Good point, good point.
But anyway, the Depression years, we just mentioned the fabulous years of the FDR era of the New Deal program, the TVA, just kind of mentioned there. And but anyway, it was, and we have a CCC program back here too, but the people that work for the CCCs, and they tell you about the statistics in 1932, how many banks went bankrupt, but $1 a day was fabulous. The employee got $5 a month, but $25 went back to the wife or to the parents. And I put a testimony from a friend of mine who's still alive, he's 92, last week. He said, Glenn, I probably would have died, and I know my parents would, because I was born late in life, and they were about to starve to death, but they got $25 a month. And they were able to make life a little easier for them. And so not only that, I learned a trade. I learned how to lay rock. I became a mason, and so he was a builder the rest of his life. So
knew how to survive.
The CCCs were a great entity for us. The President Park would not be developed if it had not, as it is, with trails and roads and all of it, if we had not had the CCCs, the Civilian Conservation Corps people here during the 30s. And they were part of the Army. When World War II started, they just switched stations and went into the battlefield.
You know, a good example of a survivor is a good friend of yours that you interviewed the other day, Herb Clabo, that just turned 100. Fascinating.
Oh, he is.
Show us another one of these. These are great.
I'll tell you, another friend of mine said, "Hey, Winchester, what credibility would you give to live to be 100? She says, "Well, I always asked what I wanted, and I tried to stay away from the influence of doctors." Maybe I'd like to see this as relief.
Yes, please. Let's look at it.
We felt as an educational tool, we wanted this kind of raise relief because children, they do go hiking, but they cannot get the phenomenal effect of the valleys and peaks. And of course, this is Mount LeConte, that is our sentinel overlooking us as it does Gatlinburg. But from the 321 deal, Big Greenberg Cove was the largest settlement in the park, 1,000 people. Those little black dots represent homes. The red ones represents churches. The red flags represents churches or schools. The white represents churches. The green represents Methodist churches. The old elementary school was down here in the high school, but we moved, and this is where we are today. We have this out here because these were feeder schools when Pittman was being operated. Buses, trucks, and all. That's an example of
oh wow,
the transportation. But they brought the kids in, those that did not want to board at the school. So anyway, that's a good example of the race relief map to see how the land was formed.
Glenn, you brought up a good point. Did several students board at the school?
Oh yes, they had. I remember one or two telling me they had to board in the barn because it was just too far to walk. See, you could walk many of them walked 5 miles one way, but when it got over that, you almost had to stay there.
Glenn, Dr. Thomas is well known in this whole area, and I know there's his foundation, and they have a big banquet every year, and it's very well received. But tell us something about him, about the man.
Well, Dr. Thomas, as I said, was handpicked to come here to help me and alleviate pain and eradicate disease as much as possible. So the first probably 10 years of his life, he was doing nothing but inoculation to give immunization against scarlet fever, diphtheria, scarlet fever, mumps, measles, all those communicable diseases. And that's the way I remember him as a person, as a child. And if I may share, as I did with Nancy now, as a child, when he would come in carrying this bag in the classroom, we all cried because we knew we was going to get shot.
You were going to get inoculated.
But it was for our own good.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, the teacher tried to calm us first and second graders down to no avail. We still sang a beautiful song, crying. But these items, before you tell any more about him, they represent his office.
Okay.
He started the first telephone intercom at Pittman Center. We had not reached out beyond that yet. If you wanted somebody in Pittman Center, you had to go through the park office. They would go to the Pinnacle, who would come back down here. So after a while, though, he got enough wire to connect to different communities himself, particularly in time when there was a fire potential. And so he was, and you see the photos of him. In physicians, you have to have continuing education.
Right.
So that's one of the places he went to after he arrived in Tennessee for continuing education back in Nashville. And these are just his artifacts of his office. Now, to the man too, Dr. Thomas was a minister, as I said, and I remember him. I grew up kind of healthy. Maybe my mother was a good physician, so I remember him mostly as a good friend and as a physician. So, I mean, a minister. I remember him mostly in the pulpit.
Tell me a little bit about what you can remember.
Well, in those days, it was a Methodist school, so we had chapel worship every morning. And he would come at least once a week. And the moment he stood in the pulpit,
He had $1 million smile, and traditionally, we're here to represent Christ. He's risen, and that was enough to get your attention.
That's how he would start. That's great. Glenn, I know music has always been just a big part of this area through church, through just entertainment. This is an interesting case. Tell us about this.
Yep. Yes, Mike, music has been a part of our culture, not only ours, but I think worldwide. I do remember a writer that came here in the 30s said, in the southern Appalachian, you're going to find the singingest bunch of people on earth. They sing while they work, they sing while they want to work, they sing when they come to work, they sing at church, they sing this. There was plenty of songs, but I think back to nature produces a lot of songs. You've got the wind. I love theatrical storms.
Yeah. And
you got all the music that comes from wildlife, birds, or the grunt of a hog, or the boar or a bear.
Right.
You got
the streams, the river.
The music. The stream will talk to you all day and never say the same word twice. So you see here some of the instruments that entered into the hands of mountain people. Most of our people came from Scotland, and they found out real quickly that the bagpipes mildewed. The high humidity did not go well with bagpipes. Mm-hmm. So they had their satisfaction for a sound of a bagpipe given them the sound of a violin or fiddle, they call it. And harmonicas, it's a worldwide instrument too, because it's been on ships, it's been in every war since the Civil War. It's easy carried, and it makes, if you learn it, you can learn it easily by making tunes. The guitar got here about 1880s. It was a Spanish, come from Spain, and so it is a little slow getting here, but promoted through Sears Roebuck Catalog, through their sales catalog, and the people returning from the Spanish-American War on back, and today it's a leading instrument, I think, in our culture.
So is bluegrass like a derivative from Scotland?
Yes.
Okay.
And the banjo, I didn't mention that the banjo really came in, but not the same time as the fiddle. But the fact was, the fiddle, although it was first used in worship, people like to have a little fun once in a while. And they would have these Saturday afternoon frolicking, or shindigs, we call them, and they'd use the banjo and the harmonica for their Saturday afternoons when they get to having fun, maybe with a little tip of moonshine. So the church leaders, particularly the pastor, that gave a lot of fodder for pastors to condemn it. So they did for until about the early 1900s, the string instruments was welcomed back into the church as a form of worship. But they were outlawed.
They were outlawed for a while.
By declaration. Now, the dulcimer did not make it here until around 1940s, some says 30s. But Jane Ritchie of Kentucky was the first one I knew when I was about the 5th grade. They would bring a lot of the outsiders would come to Pittman to introduce us to the outside world, and she would bring that down. That's a lap dulcimer. And so it kind of got its revival there through I think Berea College and other people like Gene Ritchie. And there's a hammer dulcimer too that sits on the table.
A very unique sound for both of them. I really like it. Glenn, tell us about this organ. This is quite unusual.
Well, this organ, I have 2 stories. I want to tell you the story here and tell you one over the spinning wheel.
Okay.
But Heritage Day one year, a lady said, "Glenn, you're starting that museum. You remember that old organ we had in Hills Creek Church? Yeah. I'd like to give it to you." I said, "Really?" "Yes, I'm tired of sitting in my house anymore." So it was the organ that most churches had, because pianos were hard to bring in. They were upright and much heavier. And so organs were the first of those instruments. It's a wind instrument, and the piano player or the organ player created the wind through the pumping of the pedals.
Tell us about this spinning wheel and what's unusual about it.
The wonderful story. This is the first telephone call I got. "Glenn, I hear you're building a museum." "Yep." "How would you like to have old Frederick Emmer's granddaughter's spinning wheel?" "Oh, I'd love it." "Who has it?" "I have it." "Would you loan it or sell it to us?" "No." I said, "Well, what can I do to get it?" "I want to bring it to you."
Oh.
So He said he'd had it in his house so long, and he was afraid to give it to some relative, afraid they wouldn't appreciate it. And when I got it, I didn't know we were getting a treasure trove, but the whole thing is chestnut. Now, that doesn't mean to many people today, but chestnut was straight grained, and you could split it within a half an inch or less. So it's a tree of the past, but the rim, the spokes, everything, the distaff is gone, but it's a beauty in itself. And if you want to get back on, I think you appreciate it like art more from the distance than you do here at it. Now, the first grade teacher about 20 years ago gave us that one. It was brought over from Buncombe County in 1865, and it's mixed wood, popular walnut and heavy.
Now, who did this belong to? Whose was this?
Oh, Frederick Emmert's granddaughter.
As Emmert's Cove?
Emmert's Cove, and he came here in 1784. He was a Revolutionary War soldier, buried down there in Emmert's Cove, and the valley was named after him. And if you had looked at any map prior to 1920, the word Pittman didn't show up. It was always Emmert's Cove, Emmert's Cove, Emmert's Cove. And then you left here, and about 2 miles, you'd go into Greenberg Hole, and then you went up Webb Creek or Glades.
So Emmert's Cove, okay.
Mike, we had a friend, although this is a cultural heritage museum, my friend down the way, wanted to donate a bear and a turkey. We ate them. So it's still our culture. So we accepted them freely.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Glenn, how about this exhibit? Looks like it has to do with the kitchen.
Well, it is. We label it in the kitchen, and I think that in the kitchen is where much of your family life is centered around.
Ours
the kitchen.
is.
Yes,
Definitely.
Even when you're the living room may be available, but you're still in the kitchen.
Sure.
And I think that it should present the best scene of beauty, good food, and fellowship, because those memories that children have there are lasting memories.
Absolutely.
And will be enriching memories as the ages come on. But it's a collection of things that you found in the homes prior to the park. 1934. Some of that came in a little bit later.
Where would they get a lot of their dishes and pots and pans and jars and just...
Well, at the beginning, they had to bring them in on horseback, and it was this metal, more porcelain plates. But then, as they got a little more affluent, maybe you would go down to the local store with your herbs or your furs, and you'd give them to the local storekeeper and say, the next time you're in Knoxville, and if you can bring back a set of dishes, he'd bring back whatever he could find.
Right.
And that's how, and sometimes they'd imagine, sometimes they wouldn't. And so that's a collection of plates that just actually came from my family. When my mother passed away, they was going to throw them out, and I said, well, no, they're too pretty to throw away. But it's representative of going through the different stages. After we got through the porcelain, they went to the aluminum. You got the porcelain bread pan, the old iron skillet though.
Right, that was
still everybody. You don't have
Can't survive without that.
You don't have a decent household unless you have an old iron skillet. And the other items up there, the jar, you had to keep rice or anything like beans away from rodents.
And keep them dry and away from rodents. And how about a wood stove? Most everything was cooked inside on a wood stove, or would they have an outside kitchen during the summer?
Well, in the old days, we've always had a kitchen, but when I was in school, I would go home with children, as we oftentimes do, and I remember eating a lot of food that was cooked from an open chimney. And so again, technology changes, but the quality of life, it depends on how you use those changes of technology, and going from a fireplace 5 feet wide, as I remember, cooking over a Dutch oven and whatever, moving to the kitchen, it was great. And the one thing too you learned, chestnut wood was your best wood for your cook stove because it produces quick heat, and that's what you wanted. You didn't want to spend all day waiting for the cook stove to get hot.
Right, right.
So if you had any chestnuts, you wanted to save it for the kitchen
For
stove.
the cook stove, gotcha, gotcha. How about the butter churn?
A churn like that's a cedar, that was given to us, and it was given to me by a man in my church and said, Glenn, you'll need a cedar churn to represent the fact that when you made things. He made that
And
That's beautiful.
So,
Have you ever tried to make butter with a churn?
oh, heavens, yes. Oh, over yonder, that crock, I was putting that in there one day, and about 20, 25 boys came by and said, what are you doing? I said, I'm putting in some exhibits. And not one of the 25 boys knew what a churn was. I said, you churn butter. What's churn? How do you do it?
Tell us how you churn butter.
Well, you milk the cow, and the cream runs at the top, and you skim that off, pour it in a separate container. Maybe 2 or 3 days after you get about a gallon, and you let it kind of cover to the point you pour it in a churn, and some child has to churn up and down with the dash.
How long? How long
About
would it
30
take?
minutes, depending on time of year. You want it fairly warm. If it's real cold, it took longer to make butter. But and this one I like too, Mike. The evolution of the progress of lighting. I've used every one of those. At night time,
Tell us a little bit about each
well,
one,
the fire,
please.
the pitch pine fire stick there would be useful if you were visiting neighbors after night with us, instead of using a flashlight or a lantern, because kerosene had to be purchased, and you didn't want to use.
But you could just light this and it'd stay lit until you were done. You could just put it out.
So you went from the flare of a pine knot to candles, made them, and then there's 2 kinds of kerosene lamps. One is made out of a peanut butter jar, but you can make your own. What I'm saying, they can make your own lamp cheaper than you could buy it. And then that lamp is in my household. It looks like it's kerosene in it, but it's because years of use, and it's
Just stained from it.
yeah. And then the Aladdin lamp came into being, and as I said, the TV electrified us in the late 40s, and but most all households thought they were uptowns if they had
They
a
had
light,
one of
because
those.
it gave much more illumination for reading or sewing, what have you. And these others are just kind of items that was important in a woman's life, in the kitchen, what have you. And
The meat grinder?
meat grinder, oh yeah, that was mostly for sausage, but you could grind anything you want to. But a hog that was killed, usually the first one we killed in November, and all the good parts that you wanted sausage, you run the sausage meat through there to come out and mix with the sage and other pepper and all. You got the sausage ball. You'd either can them or it must have been colder back then, but my mother would put them in little bags and hang them on strings and on rafters in a meat house. We had called a smokehouse, but I don't think you could do that anymore. But the bins, we had 2 bins that you put the hams and side meat in, and you salted them down. And they
Preserved it with salt.
Preserved it with salt.
Mm-hmm. What did they make the candles out of?
Well, 2 things: sheep tallow or oil from a shrub called walnut, and it's a parasitic plant. It's a plant that gets its root system attached to other trees, parasitic.
So you take that and you
And
can make...
they produce a nut, round. We used to play marbles with them, and but it's rich in oil. And you boil it, and the oil would come to the top. You just skim that off, and then you could just burn it as candles. The hose. Do you remember how expensive hose were in World War II? You just almost didn't get. Women would paint a strap down the back of their leg to indicate they were wearing hose. But these were purchased in 1941, just as, and not knowing when she would ever get another pair, she didn't want to wear them.
Wow.
And she died, and as a memorial, the family didn't want to use them.
So they kept them.
So a local neighbor says, just put them up there so nobody, that doesn't mean anything to me anymore anyway. But anyway, that's just the way that people handle grief.
Well, just an incredible amount of history and love. It's just, this place is just amazing. I'm so glad they did this.
And we not got much craft, but there's just typical craft basket. And many of the baskets made here went to Pi-Fi. I remember many people carrying woven items and baskets to Pi-Fi for sale too. Now they had a cooperative at Pittman Center. Mrs. Thomas started a Pinnacle Handicrafts where people would bring stuff
Bring in
down
their
there.
crafts.
But that's a willow basket. Most of the baskets were made out of white oak strip. White oak
you'd go in the forest to find you about a 3 to 5 inch diameter white oak, no bigger. It'd get tough after that. You'd cut it in long strips and peel it down, and it would be good for making baskets or bottoming of chairs if you didn't want a chair bottom with chucks.
Well, they're beautiful.
This thing.
Beautiful baskets. I know at Arrowmont you see a lot of baskets being made, and I'm sure a lot of those are white
My
oak.
mother made that one. It was the egg basket when I was growing up.
Glenn, tell us about this picture. Who are all these guys?
Well, this is the way that people did it in the old days. When roads needed repairs, you didn't go up and fuss to find the road superintendent to spill your complaints and gripes. You just went to work because there was a rule on the book in those days that if you were over 18, you must work 6 days a year. And if not, you'll pay the county treasurer $9 a year. So most people were willing to work and maintain the road. It became a competitive factor because the people in Nimmer's Cove didn't want Greenbrier to have better roads. So it was one of those competitive factors. And the issue growing up was I heard, well, if you want to see the best road, go up in Greenbrier. They work. Now this is the Greenbrier road crew.
How neat.
I can tell you, most of those are my wife's uncles. But the little one in the middle, he was the water boy, born in 1907.
Tell us about the transition from this room into this room.
Well, in the relationship, trying to maintain some cultural past, when the school organized in 1921, thereabout, they adopted the blue and gold color for the school, and they brought all the trophies. As you see, this is a trophy hall, if you want to call it, but it opens up into a reminiscence of when Pittman operated as a elementary, high school, and elementary and high school. So the colors carried forth from the old school to here. And for somehow, one of my friends found this last photo. Pittman, as you know, Mike, most of these schools here are heavy on basketball.
Right.
Football now, but it used
Right.
to be only basketball.
Basketball, okay.
But they wanted that last because it was the last goal shot on the old Pittman Center court. And the story I give is that he made his goal. I used to teach school, and I had these boys. I had 35 boys, and one day one said what he's going to be. I just thought I'd capture what others want to be. He was the only one that said, I'm going to be a pilot. And he went on, he became a pilot, but I said he made the last goal there, but he also reached his goal professionally.
Reached his goal too.
And,
What a neat picture. This is just a gorgeous school. I mean, this is one of the nicest schools I've ever had a chance to walk in.
Mike, I wanted to take you here. I want to show you one thing.
Look at the stonework. I mean, this is
It's
just...
a work of art.
It is, it is.
This is the library of the Pittman Center Elementary School, and I wanted you to see, it looks beautiful, but I wanted to draw your attention to the wall mural that we have here. Outer space brings you to the entrance of Greenbrier, and if you walk up Porter's Flat, you go to Fern Fall, and if you go up to Ramsey Cascade, you walk through two of the sentinels, the yellow poplars, and there's the flow of the Ramsey Prong, and then we fade back out into the water, which is the watery world. But I wanted you to see these. I think
How interesting.
it's wonderful. But and we're collecting books back here. Smoky Mountain Regional History Selection. Anybody that wants to donate books on these, so we're starting it. Anybody that wants to add to it, it's there.
Just contact the school. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Or you.
I just wanted you to see there's a little different coloration
Yeah, the
here.
patterns and
and
the colors.
we're trying to create mountains rather than just the solid color. And
Wow, what a neat hallway. And this, you know, that makes the kids feel good every time they walk down this hall.
I think, one thing about it, Mike, coming to school here is the highlight of the day for many of these children because they come from poverty, and homes are not exactly what you would desire to be brought up in. So when they come here, it's happy time.
Glenn, we've been in just this fabulous school and museum and enticed everybody to come and see it. If they want to come and see it, how do they do that?
Well, it's by appointment only right now because we don't have a scheduled day right at the moment, but neither do we have enough guides to give you tour guides, so that's why they must be appointment through Ms. Carr, the principal. We've tried to pass a heritage on, and the scenery yonder, I tell you what, I thank God every day I see you. Look up that way.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
If you go up there to Mount LeConte and you look back to this, you get a wonderful picture. You got the right camera. I've seen them.
Now, where did you grow up?
Well, I was born in Greenbrier.
Greenbrier, right over there.
And then I moved down here in 1930, the year I was born. So I was born in Greenbrier.
What a wonderful place to grow up and to
Actually, I
live.
got to work in the place I was born. I tell you, God's been good to me. 34 years I worked here before I retired from the Park Service.
Well, Glenn, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate
indeed.
you.
Glad to be with you. Glad you came over.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.